I used to think cheating was something that happened to other people, people who ignored the signs, people who didn't communicate, people who got bored. I thought love, if you fed it, was indestructible. I was wrong. Ethan and I met at a coffee shop in the Lower East Side 4 years ago. He was reading The Stranger by Camus, which should have been my first warning sign, but I was 26 and hungry for depth, for anyone who could look at me and make me feel seen beyond the surface. He had this calm way of speaking, like everything he said had already been considered twice before leaving his mouth. I was a whirlwind next to him, messy, passionate, prone to overthinking, and for a while that difference felt like balance. We moved in together after a year. It was one of those cramped third-floor walk-ups with peeling paint and a view of the alley, but we made it home. Sunday mornings were coffee and his playlists. Thursday nights we'd watch old movies with the sound low, our knees touching under the blanket. It felt ordinary in a good way. Safe. Then something shifted, quietly, at first. The late nights at work. The phone he started keeping face down. The way he'd hug me distractedly, like he was already thinking about something else. You know when you can feel love pulling away from you even before words confirm it? It's like standing in a room that suddenly loses its warmth. One night I saw a message light up on his phone. Still thinking about last night. I didn't open it. I just stared until the screen went dark, and for some reason I put the phone back exactly where it had been. That's the part I don't forgive myself for, not the moment he betrayed me, but the moment I started pretending I didn't see it. For 3 days after that text, I didn't sleep properly. I would lie beside him in bed, my body pretending rest while my mind staged trial after trial. Every detail became evidence. The way he turned his phone slightly away from me when he texted, how he started showering at night instead of in the morning, how he'd say, "love you" like a reflex, not a feeling. It's amazing how your brain can hold both denial and certainty at the same time. I knew. But I didn't want to make it true by saying it out loud. The thing about being cheated on is that it doesn't start when you find proof. It starts in the 1,000 tiny moments you feel unwanted, but you tell yourself you're imagining it. You want so badly to believe that love is stronger than doubt. That if you just try a little harder, talk a little sweeter, make yourself a little easier to love, they'll come back to you. One night, I waited for him to fall asleep, and I unlocked his phone. I didn't even have to guess the passcode, it was still my birthday. I opened his messages, and there she was, Sienna. There's something haunting about seeing your pain typed out in someone else's words. She said she missed him. She called him they had inside jokes, things I didn't understand anymore. And then I found pictures, not naked, not explicit, just intimate, her head on his shoulder. Their hands holding coffee cups that weren't ours, a small smile that wasn't mine. It wasn't the sex that broke me. It was realizing he had shared the softness that used to belong to me alone. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., phone in my lap, the tiles cold under my legs. I didn't cry at first. It felt like my body refused to process the betrayal. I just stared at my reflection in the mirror, this woman who had been loyal, forgiving, patient, and realized she looked stupid. Love had made me soft in all the wrong places. When he woke up the next morning, I asked, calmly, "Who's Sienna?" He blinked, still half asleep, and said, "What?" "Who is she?" I repeated. And then I watched something die in his face. That's how you know, not by words, but by the instant they realize the game is over. He said it was nothing serious, that he'd been confused. I think I laughed, not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, but the kind that spills out when pain has nowhere else to go. "Confused," I said. "You texted her that you missed her. You took her to our coffee shop, Ethan." He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. There's a specific kind of disgust that comes from realizing someone has touched another body with the same hands they use to comfort you. We didn't talk much after that. For a week, we lived like ghosts, sharing a bed, eating in silence, pretending to be functional. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How many of his things were actually mine? The way I had shaped myself around his needs, his moods, his schedule. How little of me existed outside of him. That's what infidelity steals more than anything, not love, but identity. When I finally told him to leave, he didn't argue. He just nodded, packed a small bag, and said, I'm sorry for real. I wanted to scream at him that sorry was a useless word, a band-aid on a bullet wound. But all I said was, you should go. After he left, I sat on the floor and waited for some sense of relief, but none came. Only the quiet. That cruel, heavy quiet that fills every corner of a place where love used to live. I stayed in that apartment for another month, trying to pretend I was okay. My friends said I should be angry, that I deserved better. But the truth is, I wasn't angry, I was emptied out. Like someone had hollowed me from the inside. I stopped checking my phone, stopped answering calls. I'd go to work, smile at my coworkers, then come home and dissolve into silence. People talk about heartbreak like it's loud, but it's not. It's eerily still, like your emotions have been put under anesthesia. The last thing I did before moving out was delete every picture of us. Not out of spite, but survival. I couldn't heal while living in a museum of what used to be. When I closed that door for the last time, I whispered goodbye not to him, but to the version of me who believed love alone was enough. After I closed the apartment door for the last time, I told myself that I was done with him. That what I felt wasn't love anymore, just a habit my heart hadn't shaken yet. I moved into a smaller place across the river, one of those barely affordable studios with a single window and too much light in the morning. It smelled faintly of paint and loneliness, but it was mine, and that was a start. For a while, I filled the silence with noise, podcasts, playlists, cooking videos playing in the background while I burned toast. The first few weeks felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. I had no idea what to do with my hands in the evenings. I kept wanting to text someone when something small happened, a good coffee, a weird coworker comment, before remembering that there was no one to tell. The instinct to share was still there, but the person was. When people talk about starting over, they never mention how much grief lives inside ordinary things. I couldn't go to our old grocery store. Couldn't pass the cafe where we used to sit. The city didn't change, but it felt completely different now, like someone had rearranged the map and forgotten to tell me. Everything familiar became foreign, and everything new felt temporary. My friends tried to drag me out. You're 27, they said. You can't just wither. So I went to dinners, pretended to laugh, and nodded when they said I looked good. But I could feel the gap between who they thought I was and who I had become. Healing, it turns out, isn't photogenic. It's not bubble baths or new haircuts. It's waking up in the middle of the night and remembering that the person you loved is out there living a life that no longer includes you. Months passed before I met anyone new. His name was Lucas. He worked in publishing, had a dry sense of humor, and asked real questions instead of the lazy ones people ask when they're half-interested. The first time he asked me out, I almost said no. But curiosity won. We met for coffee in a place with terrible lighting and good croissants, and I was surprised by how easy it felt to talk to him. He didn't know my history. I didn't owe him explanations. For a while, that anonymity was its own kind of freedom. We started seeing each other on weekends. It wasn't intense, not at first. He'd come over with takeout, we'd watch something, and I'd fall asleep halfway through. He'd brush my hair out of my face before leaving, always gentle, always careful. I remember thinking that maybe this was what safety was supposed to feel like, quiet, steady, without the constant edge of fear. But safety also terrified me. There were moments when he'd reach for my hand, and I'd pull away without meaning to. Moments when he'd ask if I was okay, and I'd say yes, even though part of me was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Once you've been betrayed, your body learns to expect it again. It's like muscle memory. You can love someone new and still be haunted by someone old. One night, after we'd been seeing each other for a few months, he said, "You never talk about your last relationship." I shrugged, not much to say. There's always something to say. I stared at the floor. He cheated. Lucas didn't look shocked. He just nodded slowly. That's awful. It's fine, I said too quickly. It was a while ago. He reached across the table and touched my wrist. It's not fine, but you're here. That's something. It was such a simple thing to say, but it hit me hard. I realized how long it had been since someone acknowledged my hurt without trying to fix it. For the first time in months, I let myself cry in front of someone else. Not the messy, dramatic crying I'd done alone, but the quiet kind that comes when you finally stop pretending you're over it. things with Lucas weren't perfect. Sometimes I'd still flinch when his phone buzzed. Sometimes I'd overthink the smallest silences, but he never made me feel foolish for it. When I pulled away, he waited. When I doubted, he listened. Slowly, I began to believe that maybe trust wasn't something you gave all at once. Maybe it was something you rebuilt in small, stubborn pieces. And still, some nights, I'd wake up and think about Ethan. Not because I missed him, but because part of me wanted to understand. How someone could look you in the eye and promise forever, then hand your heart to someone else. I stopped trying to find the answer. Some things don't have one. The last time I saw Ethan was a year after we broke up. I was walking home from work, and he was across the street, holding hands with someone new. He didn't see me. I watched them laugh together before disappearing into the crowd. I expected pain, jealousy, something sharp. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a soft, quiet relief, like closing a book I'd been stuck on for too long. When I got home, I texted Lucas, "Dinner." He replied, "Always." I looked around my apartment, at the plants finally thriving, at the life that had quietly grown in the ruins of something else, and I realized I wasn't the same woman anymore. The hurt had shaped me, but it hadn't ruined me. I didn't need closure. I already had it. A few years later, I almost didn't recognize my own life. Lucas and I had moved in together, slowly, carefully, after 2 years of testing whether we really fit. We'd found a place near the park, with uneven floors and sunlight that hit the kitchen counter just right in the mornings. I still caught myself sometimes, when he'd kiss my shoulder or make me coffee, thinking, I can't believe something this simple is mine. It wasn't perfect, of course. No relationship ever is. There were arguments about money, dishes left in the sink, the way he forgot to tell me when he'd be late. But there was never deceit. Never that quiet dread that used to live in my chest like a second heartbeat. When we fought to fix things. When we laughed, it was real. Still, healing doesn't end just because time passes. There were moments, small, unexpected ones, when the past would reach out and tap me on the shoulder. Like the day Lucas's phone buzzed while we were watching a movie, and he smiled at the screen before putting it face down. My stomach flipped. It wasn't rational, but trauma rarely is. He must have noticed something in my face because he picked up the phone, turned it toward me, and said, "It's my sister." That tiny gesture, so effortless, so kind, undid me a little. I hadn't realized how long I'd been holding my breath in relationships, waiting for proof that I could finally exhale. Around that time, I started seeing a therapist again. Not because anything was wrong exactly, but because I wanted to understand why parts of me still tensed up when things were good. My therapist said something that stuck with me. Survivors of betrayal sometimes confuse peace with boredom. That hit hard. I'd been so used to chaos that calm felt suspicious. I started writing again. Nothing serious, just small personal essays I'd never show anyone. Most were about love, loss, and the way grief disguises itself in daily life. Writing was the first thing that had been mine before Ethan, and it felt good to reclaim it. Lucas would peek over my shoulder sometimes, and I'd laugh and push him away, but secretly I liked that he wanted to see. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. It was an ordinary day. Rainy, gray, the kind of weather that makes you sleepy. I got a message request on social media from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Ethan. My heart did that stupid flutter it hadn't done in forever. Not romantic, just reflex. I stared at his name for a long time before opening it. It was short. "Hey, I don't expect a reply. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I was selfish and I know I hurt you. I think about it sometimes and I regret it. I hope you're happy." I didn't reply right away. I didn't even tell Lucas at first. I just sat there, rereading it. My first instinct was to ignore it to protect my peace. But part of me wanted to understand what sorry meant coming from him now, years later, when I'd already done the work to move on. That night I told Lucas about it. He listened quietly, nodding. Then he said, "You can reply if you want. You don't owe him anything, but you also don't owe him silence." So I did. I wrote, "I appreciate the message. I'm doing well now. I hope you've grown, and I hope you're kind to whoever you're with." He replied once more just, "I'm glad you're okay." And that was it. No drama, no tears. Just the quiet closing of a door I hadn't realized was still slightly open. After that, I felt lighter. Not because he'd apologized, but because I'd finally seen how small his power had become in my life. He was just a man from my 20s who made bad choices and taught me what not to settle for. He wasn't the center of my story anymore. Months later, Lucas and I went on a trip. Nothing fancy, just a few days by the coast. One morning, we watched the sunrise together, sitting on damp sand with coffee in our hands. He looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd met earlier?" "Yeah," I said, "but maybe we wouldn't have worked back then. I had to learn how to stop bleeding before I could stop cutting people who touched me." He smiled, brushed his thumb against my cheek. "Then I'm glad I met you when I did." And that was the moment I realized something quiet but important. We don't always get happy endings. Sometimes we just get peaceful ones. And sometimes that's better. When we got home, I deleted Ethan's message thread. Not out of anger or spite, but because it had served its purpose. Closure, I learned, doesn't always look like a conversation. Sometimes it's just a choice to keep living, to keep loving, to keep showing up for the life that's finally your own. I'm not sure if I believe in meant to be anymore, but I do believe in people showing up when you stop begging them to. I believe in the quiet love that grows out of honesty, not desperation. And most of all, I believe in myself, in the woman who walked away, rebuilt herself from the wreckage, and learned that forgiveness doesn't mean going back. Because in the end, that's what this story was really about. Not him, not even us. Just me. Finally choosing myself. A year later, everything looked different again. I'd started my own small design studio, mostly freelancing from home. Lucas had changed jobs too. He was doing something he actually liked now, after finally walking away from the corporate grind that used to leave him miserable and quiet every night. We settled into something steady but real. Mornings filled with coffee and music, evenings spent cooking together, our small apartment constantly cluttered with plants and art supplies and mismatched mugs. But as much as I wanted to say I'd finally arrived, the truth was more complicated. Stability doesn't erase the ghosts that shaped you, it just gives you more space to listen to them. And sometimes, late at night, when Lucas was asleep beside me and the city lights flickered through our window, I'd catch myself wondering whether peace would ever feel natural, whether I'd ever stop waiting for something to fall apart. It's strange how your mind tries to protect you from joy once it's learned the language of loss. Around that time, a friend of mine from college, Mara, went through a brutal breakup. Her fiancé had cheated on her with someone from work. The night she called me sobbing, I could feel her heartbreak like an echo of my own past. I stayed on the phone with her for hours, saying all the things I wished someone had said to me back then, that she wasn't stupid, that love sometimes breaks you before it rebuilds you, that closure comes in fragments, not all at once. When I hung up, Lucas turned to me and said softly, "You were good to her." I smiled, but my chest ached. It's weird, though. I think I was really talking to myself. The next few months blurred together, work, dinners with friends, the quiet rhythm of a life that felt, for the first time, solid. Yet underneath it, I could sense something shifting. Lucas was more distant lately. Not in an obvious way, just subtle things, a pause before answering, an unfamiliar look when I talked about the future. One night, we were lying in bed when I asked, "Are you happy?" He hesitated. "Of course, why would you ask that?" "I don't know," I said. "You've been quiet lately." He sighed, rolled onto his back. "It's not you. I've just been thinking about things, about what comes next." That phrase, "what comes next," sat in my chest like a stone. I didn't push him that night, didn't want to turn it into something it was. But a part of me couldn't shake the unease. I'd promised myself I'd never ignore my instincts again. A few weeks later, he told me the truth. He'd been offered a position in another city, one he hadn't mentioned before because he didn't want to worry me until it was real. It was a great opportunity, but it was across the country. "So what does that mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He looked torn. "It means I don't know what to do. I love you, but I also don't want to resent staying." I wanted to be understanding. I wanted to be the supportive partner who said, "Go chase your dream, I'll be here." But the truth was, I was tired of being the one people left for something next. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing. I told him I loved him, and he said he loved me too, but sometimes love isn't enough to anchor two people in the same place. When he finally left a few months later, it wasn't explosive or cruel. We packed his things together, shared a quiet dinner, cried a little, and promised to stay in touch. I think we both knew we wouldn't, not really. After he drove away, I sat on the floor of our half-empty living room for a long time. I thought about all the endings I'd lived through, each one different, each one teaching me something new about what I could survive. And for once, I didn't feel like the victim of my own story. Instead, I felt still, sad, yes, but steady. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt again, the way I always had. I took on new clients, went on long walks, met friends for wine and laughter. There were nights I missed him so much it felt like my ribs were too small for my heart, but there were also mornings when I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about him for hours, maybe days. Healing is a quiet kind of progress. You don't notice it happening until you suddenly do. One evening, months later, I got home to find a letter in my mailbox. Actual paper, no one sent those anymore. It was from Lucas. He wrote that he missed me, that the new city wasn't what he thought it would be, that he'd been replaying our last night together in his head. But near the end, he said something that stopped me. I think we met at the exact right time to teach each other what love can look like when it's honest, even if it couldn't last forever. I read that line over and over, and instead of crying, I smiled, because he was right. People always talk about forever like it's the only measure of love that counts. But I've learned that some of the most meaningful connections are temporary. They show up, change you, and then let you go. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on some music, and opened the windows. The city hummed around me. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. I wasn't trying to fix anyone or prove my worth or outrun my own fears. I was just there, present, whole. Maybe that's all happy ending really means. Not a perfect life or a forever love, but being able to sit in the quiet of your own company and know you made it through everything that was meant to break you. And maybe that's what I'll tell the next person who writes me a message like the one I once wrote on Reddit, desperate and lost and wondering how to start again. You already have. Months passed, then years, in that quiet, steady rhythm that follows every heartbreak once the noise dies down. The edges of grief softened into memory, the kind that no longer stings but leaves a faint ache, like an old scar when the weather changes. Life didn't get easier, exactly. It just became more hers again. By 35, she had learned the art of existing without needing everything to make sense. The city no longer felt like something she was surviving. It felt like something she belonged to. She had her work, her friends, her small rituals, the morning coffee by the window, the Saturday market where the barista remembered her order, the way her apartment always smelled faintly of lavender and fresh paint. Every so often, she would find herself thinking of the people who had passed through her life like storms. David, the first betrayal that taught her how fragile trust could be. Aaron, the second chance that ended in almost love. Lucas, the steady flame that burned clean and left her warm but alone again. Each of them had left her something, though it took her years to see it. David had shown her the danger of losing herself in someone else's world. Aaron had reminded her of the reckless beauty in vulnerability. Lucas had taught her that love doesn't always mean staying. It sometimes means knowing when to let go. There were days she missed them, though she no longer wished them back. The ache wasn't for them as people, but for who she'd been when she loved them, the version of herself that still believed love could save everything. But maybe, she thought, love was never meant to save. Maybe it was meant to reveal. On a cold evening in November, she was leaving her studio when she ran into Lucas again. It had been nearly 4 years. He looked older, sharper around the edges, but still familiar in that way certain faces always are. They smiled, awkward and gentle, and ended up walking together for a while, just talking. He was married now, he said, and happy. She smiled and meant it when she said she was glad. He asked about her, if she was seeing anyone, and she laughed softly. A few people here and there, nothing that stuck. When they reached the corner where their paths split, they paused. The silence between them wasn't heavy, just real. He said, "I think you were the first person I really loved." "And you were the first person I didn't lose myself for," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. He smiled at that, nodded once, and crossed the street. She watched him disappear into the crowd, then turned and kept walking the other way, into the hum of the city that had seen all her versions and still held her like a friend. Later that night, she sat on her balcony, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the lights of the skyline flickering like a heartbeat. Somewhere below, someone was laughing, music spilled from an open window, a siren wailed faintly in the distance. Life, messy, loud, unsteady, went on. She thought about how far she'd come, how once she'd believed being loved was the same as being chosen, and how now she understood it was different. That love could be real even if it wasn't permanent, that sometimes choosing yourself wasn't loneliness but freedom. There was no dramatic ending, no grand revelation. Just this moment, a woman sitting alone, at peace in the quiet, no longer waiting for anyone to come back, no longer trying to prove that she was enough. The city breathed around her, and she breathed with it. And somewhere deep inside, she realized that maybe this quiet understanding, this soft surrender to her own life, was what love had been leading her toward all along. Not the kind that stayed, but the kind that let her stay with herself,